All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. So thank you all for coming today. My name is Elise McLaughlin, and I'm a senior associate at Minerva Strategies, which is the communications agency that works with the Climate Justice Resilience Fund. So you may see me in the chat and the image of Hillary pops up because I'm logged into her account. Heather and Hillary are actually in Bangladesh with our new practitioner-led governing board. It is their first in-person meeting, so that's exciting. And they've asked me to fill in while they are away. So just to give you a little bit of background about the Solution Series, it's something that the CJRF started in 2022. It's a chance for us to highlight the work that CJRF partners are doing. It's also an opportunity for partners to explain lessons learned, challenges, and triumphs with one another, other funders, and a larger community of climate resilience practitioners. We are recording today's session, and it will be shared out at a later date, along with any additional links that our speakers today, the Indigenous Climate Action, would like to share. And with that being said, I am going to turn it over to them now.
Thanks, Elise, and thanks to CJRF for having us. We're so excited to be here and present a little bit about our work, the impacts, and some of the outcomes that we've seen over the last year of working with CJRF. So with that said, Minan Devaneshi Kwe Indigenous Gitagan Zibi and Donjaba, Gigo and Dodem, Anishinaabe Kwe and Now Port Moody Megwan Dinda. So hello everyone, my name is JC Chiblo. I'm Anishinaabe from Garden River First Nation, which is in the Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory or in the Great Lakes region. But I currently live and reside on Coast Salish territories just outside of Vancouver. And I am the Education and Training Manager with Indigenous Climate Action. And with that, I will pass it to Jacob to introduce yourself.
Jacob Crane. Hello everyone, my name is Jacob Crane. I'm from Tsuut'ina Nation, located in Treaty 7 territory, also known as Southern Alberta. And I go by he, him, and I am the engagement coordinator for Indigenous Climate Action. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jamie for an introduction. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie Bork-Blyne. I am a Métis from the Buffalo Lake Métis settlement in Treaty 6 territory. For those who don't know what Métis is, because a lot of folks don't, it just basically means I'm my family is half European and half Indigenous to Turtle Island. I am the strategic communications and partnership coordinator at Indigenous Climate Action, and I use all pronouns. It's good to be here with you all.
Thanks, team. We thought we would give folks a little bit of an intro to like, who is ICA? What are our work before we start answering some of those questions, just so that you might have just so you get caught up on what we do here at Indigenous Climate Action. So just to give you a quick overview of how today is going to go, we're going to give you a quick overview, like quick 5 minutes of what are some of the main projects that Indigenous Climate Action works on. And then we're going to go into a panel discussion with the 3 of us here, answering some of the questions such as what's the most impactful outcome that we've seen individually? What lessons have we learned from our work? What challenges have we encountered? There have been many. And what's next, which I think is the most exciting question that we have. And then we're going to go into an interactive activity, and I will explain all of that when we get there. So don't worry, no one will be left behind. We'll make sure that everyone's set up when we get to that. And then we'll do a really nice quick Q&A, question and answers, and then we will be saying goodbye to everyone. So with that, I'm going to get started. Indigenous Climate Action is the only Indigenous-led climate justice organization within so-called Canada. So we are located north of the medicine line, is what we say, within Canada. And we work on a ton of different projects, and we have a ton of different pathways and ways that we achieve our goals of amplifying voices, supporting Indigenous-led climate solutions, and really just so much more, which you'll see in a second. So to keep it as quick as possible, I'm going to try and really overview these, but if you are interested, I will link our website in a minute, and you can feel free to download some of these resources and read a little bit more in depth on each of the pages. So we have a very well thought out research program that aims to work on decolonizing climate policy in Canada. We have our first phase 1 report already out, ready for you to read, and we have a summary report for the second one that's going to be coming out this year. Really important work, and the second report is focused on what do Indigenous folks want to see in climate policy for it to have a decolonized and Indigenous-centered approach to policy. We also do some more side things like a sneak peek into the risks and threats of nature-based solutions for Indigenous folks. Again, another research project where we took in information from, folks from across the country and different regions in the country to really see what folks are seeing about nature-based solutions, how they're being enacted in community, and how we can improve those solutions. Next, we have our climate leadership program. This is actually one of the baby projects of ICA that I started working on a few years ago. And it is now in full fruition. It came about over 21 community workshops and about 10 to 15 one-on-one interviews with elders, knowledge keepers, and just community folks that already do this kind of climate work. And out of it came this amazing curriculum that's aimed at inspiring Indigenous folks to become or reinvigorate their own climate strategies and climate action approaches, since we truly believe that Indigenous knowledge holds the solutions to climate change. So that's the framework of that program. I could talk about it all day, but I'm going to keep going because that's the one that I've worked on the most. We also do a lot of just transition work. Jacob's actually the person that's been leading a lot of that. And we partner with a bunch of different groups on this. We've incorporated solar projects into different frontline communities and frontline groups to support their frontline efforts, of course. And we have a guide that will be coming out this year at some point that you'll be able to read to see, how the best methods and practices for incorporating green energies and renewable energies in Indigenous communities. We also have this amazing new program about Indigenous-led divestment. We have a webinar coming up, I believe it's next Monday. We can share the link to register for that if you're interested. Basically, we were part of the No More Dirty Banks campaign, which was a really successful campaign to raise awareness about what is divestment and why Indigenous folks should be at the forefront of making those decisions and leading divestment in general. We also have a really amazing pathway that's focused on healing justice. So right now we're working internally to make sure that all of our staff feel supported and feel comfortable doing their work in a way that is in line with our Indigenous teachings and our Indigenous worldviews. We hope to eventually have much more outward facing things for folks to pay attention to, but at the moment we are focusing on internally. We do have some things on our YouTube channel if you wanted to learn more about what healing justice is. There's a couple panels there where we talk a little bit more in depth about what that looks like for us at ICA. We also have a youth engagement program. These are just some of the examples. We do some online gatherings, hopefully transitioning to in-person this year. We also have a youth leadership council, which has been really instrumental in how we design and implement our programs. They basically give us guidance and tell us what the best way is to do our work. So really, really grateful for those folks. And it's a representation of people from across so-called Canada as well. All young people, young leaders. Another key aspect of our work is amplifying voices. So of course, that would be things like amplifying frontline communities and frontline struggles and issues that people are dealing with in so-called Canada. We also do this amazing thing from our coworker called ICA's Weekly Roundup. So on our socials, we'll put in relevant news, job interests, just basically as much information as we can so that other folks can really have their voices heard on our platforms. We also have a really great podcast, which you can get on, I believe, Spotify, basically all of the places that you can get podcasts. And it's the Indigenous Climate Action Pod, or ICA Pod. And it has a bunch of different topics. So I really recommend that you go check it out. The example I have here is In the Know, Hides, Tans, and Leathers. So it's a really interesting one if you want to learn more about what hide tanning is and how we do that as Indigenous folks. And I think with that, we are done that part. I will leave the questions for later. And right now we're actually going to transition into more of a panel discussion, answering a couple of those questions. So I actually wanted to start with Jacob. And I wanted to ask this question to you first. So Jacob's been working with ICA for about 2 years, I believe, right? Yeah. Great. So out of those 2 years, what has been the most impactful outcome from your work at ICA?
I think the most impactful, projects that I've kind of helped spearhead is making sure that the Gidimt'en checkpoint had solar panels, as well as the Ottoman Collective. That was the picture that we saw earlier, ensuring that their camp was solarized and that they had the proper support systems to ensure that they can live off the land. They can do what they want to do. Those are the two projects that I'm really proud of, and that I will take with me for a long time.
Love it. I love that. Yeah, Jacob was really instrumental in getting those put forward. And just so folks don't know, one other one that we did was called Nimki Ashbakong, which is a Indigenous-led group. Really, honestly, great place. And they do a lot of language revitalization there. It's basically like they call it a forever camp, where you can go and learn the language. You can go and learn how to tan hides, how to trap, how to hunt. And the reason why this is important is because I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, but that is another project that Jacob was instrumental in supporting. So great work. Love it. For Jamie, I kind of have the same question for you. So Jamie works in much more like communications aspect. What have been the most impactful outcomes from your work that you've noticed?
I kind of feel that I'm going to look to like ICA as like an organization itself in terms of like impacts, because a lot of times folks like to like Indigenous people in so-called Canada in general. And if you look at ICA, Indigenous Climate Action, we all represent very different nations. Like Jacob for himself is Dene, JC or Anishinaabe, I'm Métis, and I'm and the different experiences that we bring from our nations to ICA as a collective in order to fight colonialism and decolonize policies, I think is one of the most impactful things for me, because Canada is the only country in the world that has race-based legislation. And that doesn't just mean for like like Indigenous folks are treated or have certain type of rights based on our pan-indigeneity. It's more of every nation has different rights to and different access to resources and territory and services. Like for myself, for example, I'm Métis, but I am my family, my community. There's our Métis communities. We're the only Métis land-based people in Canada. We're all within the province of Alberta. There's only 8 communities. In order to become a member of this community, my grandfather, who was a war veteran, you had to be the descendant of a war vet in order to be on this community and to have Métis title and to have mineral rights and rights to the land. So I do feel like one of the biggest impacts of ICA is having access to these different experiences of Indigenous people.
That's beautiful. I think that's so true. And we really try to enact that in our work. And my example is the climate leadership program. Like I said, I was going to talk about that. That's what I work on the most. It's what I got for you. One of the ways is that we do that, what Jamie was talking about, is by making sure that we're not approaching any of our work with that pan-Indigenous approach. So we keep the curriculum itself for the climate leadership is about 20 hours. Like it's a lot, it's a lot, but it's flexible and, easy to move things around so that any community that we go to or that wants to offer this can take it and alter it in a way that feels good to them. So to have relevant examples, to have teachings that are in line with their own communities and nations and stories. And that I think is one of the most impactful things about our work, is that it has that ability. And with the climate leadership program, we've been so lucky to be able to train over 75 people over the last year, which is a great success for us being the first year of the full program. But I think honestly, like the most exciting outcome for me in this work, especially with regards to the climate leadership program, was actually, we had someone take the program in like the beginning of the year last year, and they actually showed a lot of interest in wanting to learn to facilitate this program. So we do have also a train the trainers vibe where we teach people how to facilitate this program. And that young person then they took the facilitation training as well. And now they actually are going to implement this own training in their community without us even coming there. And for us, that is very successful because we want communities to take this resource that we have and use it however they see fit. It doesn't need to be a training done by us. It can be done by the communities for the communities, which is, I think, one of the things that sets a lot of ICA's work out from other groups, is that the way that we design a lot of our programs is to really adapt to whatever nation that we're working with. So that's one of the most impactful things for me that I thought would be really important to mention. With that, I'm going to move to the next one, and I'm going to ask Jamie, what lessons have you learned from your work with ICA?
What lessons have I learned? Hmm. We have a lot of folks who approach us. Like part of my partnership coordinator role is we have a lot of folks, allies, approach us, and they usually have some really great ideas of projects that they want to get involved in, or they want us to be involved in. But I find that a lot of times we don't really have the opportunity to, and I think this is one of the things was a course we're going to take going forward, is we get bombarded with requests of what we could be working on, not necessarily what we should be working on, but I think we take on that should mentality and not really try to talk about what it is that we are working on and asking how folks outside allies and whatnot can support the work that we're already doing. Because I do find a lot of the times with these requests that we get bombarded, not bombarded, I don't say bombarded, but in some ways we do. And I think a really good example is there was a request a while back where someone wanted to get support from ICA in order to push for electric. They wanted to, how did this go again? These folks wanted to get a support letter from ICA, or our support, so they could push for electric vehicle charging ports to be built. And for every 10 that they were going to build one in an Indigenous community. And I was like, okay, first of all, how many folks in an Indigenous community actually have an electric car? Does this feel like a really great partnership where it's actually going to benefit first Indigenous people? Is this actually a need of Indigenous people? So I'm starting to feel that with some of the work that we do, instead of having folks come to us what they think that we need, sharing the work that we are doing and how our allies can support us in those areas and actually get the support that we actually need.
I love that, changing up the framing. So it's like, this is how you can support us, and this is the work that's been outlined from the research that we've done in communities that is reflective. And I think that's a great example. Electric vehicles are great in some places, but it's not always accessible for communities, especially way up in the north, where there's just not the same grid connection, less sunlight, and in general, that some of them don't work when it's just too cold. So it's really important for us to be mindful that not all of these solutions are going to work in every single community. And again, that's why it's so important for Indigenous folks to be leading these solutions. Just like Jamie said, allowing us as Indigenous people to determine what works best for us, and then allowing us to implement those, which I think CJRF is really great for. They're really supportive of many of our projects and allow us to do the work the way that we see we need to do it. So I really just wanted to mention that. And I thank you, Jamie. Same question, Jacob. What lessons have you learned from your work?
A lot. So much. When I first came to ICA 2 years ago, I didn't really understand the difference in narrative that Indigenous people hold, and that the difference in narrative that non-Indigenous folks hold. And you can see what gets the most attention based off of the resources that they have. But where did they get these resources? They got them from extracting from Indigenous communities, right? And so that was a hard wake up for me, to really understand that, because I thought that we were all, equal in this landscape here. But actually, the Indigenous community, and especially in the environmental area, is heavily under supported. But that really translates into other things, like our knowledge not being accepted in a lot of spaces, whereas like Western colonial education is, and it's almost like it's extra supported, and that this storytelling methodology doesn't really pan out for these folks. But that goes back to that narrative shift, and how can we continue to move that along, and how can we continue to have those support systems and set in place for us. And I'm going to lean on a question, or I guess it was a thought that one of my coworkers, Carol, had mentioned to me the other day, is that it's really hard to do this work when you're coming out of certain disparities that you may be carrying with you, like coming out of poverty, but also trying to leave the world a better place, as they say. And I think that's something that really hit home for me, and that's something that to really bring awareness to is how do we continue to do this work, and how do we continue to support Indigenous communities. And shout out to CJRF for really supporting the work that Indigenous Climate Action has been doing for a long time. And I just want to say Siaskus, which means thank you very much.
I love it. Great answer. I had one in mind, but I was just like really taking in that reflection piece that Carol, that question that she gave you, and Carol has wisdom beyond her years. I think for me, one of the greatest lessons, that's the one we're on, right? Lessons. And I already kind of knew this, but it just like, I guess all clicked differently. So again, I know climate leadership program examples, it's the most of the work that I do at ICA is that. So I am going to focus on that. We ask Indigenous folks, because the program right now is for Indigenous folks only. It's just the way that it's been designed. We ask, like people, what are you seeing in your communities with regards to climate change? How is it impacting you? How is it impacting your family? How is it impacting your nation and your community? So we have all these different levels and questions and ways that we ask these. And a lot of these people actually come to the program with like little to no, like it's a beginner level. So it's folks coming with like little to no knowledge. So they say little to no knowledge about climate change. And I think the most like where it really hits home for me on how great the work that we do here is they have all the information. Like these people already know all of the things, and they have solutions, and they have ways that, some of the activities we go through, what would you want to see in your community? What would be beneficial for you as an individual? Because like climate change is going to require so much more than just us as individuals, but also societal change. So I really make sure that we hit home, like, how can you use your life experiences, your knowledge of being connected to the land in the way that you are, to inform other policies, to inform programs, to inform how we bring solutions forward and how we create those solutions. And like the answers that we get is just amazing. And every time it's just, I sit there and I always take a second to tell folks, like, look at all of this knowledge that you have. This is your lived experience. This is lived knowledge. And this is something that unfortunately scientists cannot get unless they are Indigenous, and they are you. Right? Every Indigenous person has their own connection to land. Like Jamie was mentioning earlier, we have different ways of connecting to the land, some being similar, some concepts being similar, but we all inherit those differently. We learn those differently, and we enact those differently. So every time we do the climate leadership program, I just get so excited to see other people realize their own potential in those moments when you tell them you have knowledge and you have solutions to offer, and you have value in that sense. So a lot of the times we get really good feedback on that. And I always like to compile that information and give it back to them, just to really highlight, like, they already are climate leaders. Just as an Indigenous person that spends time out on the land, in my opinion, you are a climate leader, and you know more about climate change than even someone like myself that learned it in school or in like science programs. So that's been one of the most important lessons. Like I knew that already, like I knew we had the solutions, I knew we had the knowledge, but I began to embody it and feel it in my heart and soul. And that was, I think, the most impactful lesson that I've learned. With that being said, I'm going to pass it back to Jacob. What challenges have you encountered in any of your work? And how did you overcome them?
A lot of challenges because of the racism that I felt as a young person. I have long hair. I've been told that I look very Indigenous, and so there's, you can point me out like a mile away. And growing up with that, you kind of get that oppression that you face every day as a young person, and then growing up, and then you start to see that in the workplace, like not at ICA, but when you're interacting with external people that are having requests, and oh, we know what's best for you folks. We're here to save the day, yeah, that doesn't make sense. Let's do it this way. Let's do it this scientific way. And so I think, kind of like playing off of what JC just said there, I think those are some of the things, that racism within the environmental space is what I've really faced. And it has a lot to do with where those frameworks and mechanisms are rooted in. And it's really hard sometimes to to pair a square with a circle, where as Indigenous people are very circular, very, community minded. It's just a different way of being. And sometimes it's really hard to put those together. And so those are some of the things that I've kind of face. But I guess, remedies to that is I smudge all the time. When I go into work, it's almost like I'm going into a ceremony, not to sound too sacred or anything like that, but, you have to have a certain mindset when you come into work, that you're going to be okay with, telling folks, a group of, non-Indigenous white men, this is the way how it's supposed to be. A room full of that's hard to do, for not just me, but for a lot of people. And if you don't understand that that's hard, then I would ask you to check yourself and ask yourself, wait a minute, am I a part of the problem? Or how is it, what does that even mean, to go in a room and to speak with folks that are different from you, and everything they stand for is different. And so it's really interesting how it all plays. But I definitely smudge. I think working with ICA, my spiritual connection has actually grown a lot. And I feel like I'm in a heightened sense whenever I do the work for ICA. So those are my remedies, just close to Creator.
Mic drop. I feel like your response had a lot of pieces of healing justice, like, incorporating ceremony into our work is one of the ways that we do that, whether that's, as a group or as individuals, to show up in the best way possible. And of course, like that example you had, Jacob, of going to a room and laying out on the line of like, this is the way we want things done. I think that key difference for maybe non-Indigenous folks and us is like, this work is our heart work. This is like about love. This is about love for Mother Earth, love for the land. So it's much more difficult when you approach it as that framework, as opposed to like, these are resources and things that we can use. For us, we're like, those are our relatives, those are our teachers, those are our cousins and our aunties and uncles and all of the things, our grandmothers. So it's just like an entirely different thing. And for me, it's like laying the heart out on the line and having people, that's tough, because there's going to be criticisms and pushback and things like that. I love it. That's a great one. Jamie, what challenges have you encountered, and which ones what have you overcome them?
Yeah, how do you follow Jacob's answer though? I know he used Creator as the answer to their challenge, and I want to be in good with Creator too. So I think one of the biggest challenges, like I've only been with ICA for 8 months, and I kind of have two roles. So there's that partnership role, but there's also that strategic communications role as well. And I have the opportunity to travel with ICA twice, first as a contractor to both COP26 and 27. Did I say that right? Okay. And I've never heard of COP before. As a person in general, even as an Indigenous person, I had no idea COP existed until I attended in Scotland 2 years ago. And the idea for me going was to capture, to film why the purpose of Indigenous people attending this international forum on climate change, and why it's important to participate and to be involved and to encourage other Indigenous peoples to attend. And usually I found when we created content, I think one of the challenges after we create the content is, where do we share it in order to enlighten Indigenous folks? And I think I'm looking, when I really think about, a lot of the times we look to non-Indigenous platforms. And I feel what happens there is, it's almost like where we should be looking to like Indigenous platforms. There's a lot of Indigenous influencers out there who have large followings with people who have strong connections to community in large numbers. And I do feel that's one of the pathways that we could be looking at when wanting to amplify our content and our work, and amplify the voices of community, because it almost feels like, why are we looking to non-Indigenous platforms? It's almost like we don't have trust or faith in the expertise or the capacities of these Indigenous platforms that we could be utilizing instead.
That's great. Being mindful of time, we do have we're running out of time. I know we could talk all day, but I am going to skip that question for myself and instead ask you both, and then I will answer it too. What's next on your work plans for ICA? And I'll start with you, Jamie.
We just started writing these like yesterday. What
are your hopes and dreams?
I do feel like how do we reach more Indigenous folks about the work and with the work that we do and how to get them involved. It's short and sweet.
Love it. Amazing. Jacob, what's next for your work at ICA?
Just making us more visible, sorry. Making us more visible at conference gatherings, celebrations, I'm trying to do something a little bit different this year. I would like to attend powwows and feasts and different community events and really have a in-person conversation with people about climate change and see if we can do that a little bit differently, instead of going to like a conference and it being very like Western colonial settings, even though it is in a certain space, and the conference may be themed differently, but being a little bit more personable and going into community that way, and just showing up as a community member and talking about ICA and the work that we do. That's on my list.
Love it. I'm going to kind of work the answers to those two questions into the same response, and then we're going to get into this little bit of an interactive activity. And of course, there's going to be time for Q&A, all of that fun stuff. So you'll be able to ask us all questions if you want to learn more. So the two questions I'm going to answer, because in case you didn't know, is what challenges have you encountered and what's next for your work? So last year, as I'm sure everyone here has experienced and know, COVID was still relatively rampant in Indigenous communities. So ICA continued to hold that boundary of we're not going to travel into communities in the hopes of really, maintaining safety and prioritizing the health of our elders and our community members, especially those in isolated communities. So we didn't do any in-person trainings last year. And for me, that was a challenge. I had actually never done an online training before. So we did have to, and we used these words so much last year. I feel like everyone did over the last few years, is like pivot and shift our focus from this curriculum being an in-person curriculum to it being still as impactful online for the climate leadership program. Again, told you that's where I work. And what's next is honestly, this year, we really want to do a lot more in-person gatherings. I think Jacob's hit it right on the nose there. It's like in person, it just hits different. Like, it's really hard, and we tried our best to build community online in Zoom like this. But like you can kind of tell right now, it's very hard to build that same sense of community and that same sense of kinship as you would in person in a community. So our goal this year is definitely to prioritize going into communities and offering these trainings and really skilling up other folks to be able to train and do these trainings themselves. So it doesn't always need to be myself and Carol doing these trainings. Indigenous folks can do this themselves. They have the skill sets, they have the knowledge, and it's really easy to do in the sense of like all of the curriculum is lined up with activities, timelines, draft agendas. It has everything that you could need in hopes that folks can take it and run with it. And that's what's next for our work, is really just creating more education programs, because we just got asked for more and more. That was the feedback from last year from the program. It's like there just wasn't enough, which is a good problem to have. So our goal for this year is to really try to make it much more rounded, potentially create other programs, and just keep that flowing. So that said, that's what's next. I'm going to ask folks I'm going to type it in here. So we're going to be doing something called Mentimeter. And don't worry if you've never heard of it or haven't used it, it should be relatively simple. You just type in www.menti.com. And on that page, it should show up as one long bar, and that's where you put the code in there. And this will all be anonymous. So if you're like, I don't know the answers to these questions, that's okay. We're also gonna, talk about them a little bit, the three of us. So the code that you would then type in is 16578647. And you just press submit. And the question that should pop up on your screen is, what are some Indigenous-led actions that you know of? So we want to kind of get a gauge of, what folks know, if there's any solutions or things that we can put forward and suggestions for us, for you all to check out. So with that being said, I'm just going to give folks a minute to do that. And if you don't have the ability to use Menti, you can also type it into the chat and I can type it in for you. So if you're like, I don't have that, no Menti, you can just type it directly into the chat here. And I will type in the question in case that is the strategy that you need. And I believe you can just type in as many answers as you want.
Are we doing this too?
Yeah, go ahead, Jamie, get in there. That's okay. You can also type your responses right into the chat here and I can type them in for you. So what are some Indigenous-led climate actions that you know of? Feel free to put them in the chat and I can add it for you. Oh, I'm just noticing someone put in Indigenous peoples and environmental injustice at York University. Fun fact, I used to work for Deb McGregor on the Indigenous Environmental Justice Project. I love it. Good one. Feel free to type them in the chat as well if you don't have Menti, which is okay. I'm just going to read some of these and then I'm going to ask Jacob and Jamie to, maybe throw out some more that you know of in your territories. And then I want to expand a little bit of like what ICA thinks Indigenous-led climate solutions are and could be. So of course, I mentioned the Indigenous Environmental Justice Project led by Dr. Deb McGregor. Deb McGregor is Anishinaabe from Birch Island. They changed their name. It's in the, I think it's Robinson Huron Treaty Territory in the Great Lakes region. It's just a couple hours east of me, actually. So I think some folks have put in some really great responses here so far. So land back, that's a great one. We definitely big supporters of that here at ICA and that framework in general. Land defense, yes, that's a great one. And there is a report. So on the publications page that I linked earlier, here, I'll link it again for folks, just in case. You can take a look at this really amazing report. It's called Indigenous Resistance to Carbon, and it specifically talks about frontline land defense and how much carbon they have stopped from entering the atmosphere. And it is like just absolutely amazing. So if you want to look at that, I would highly recommend it. It's a great report. It has a lot of graphs and things for you to look at to be able to see, the impact of Indigenous frontline resistance, which is really, really important. I'm also seeing Land Back Lane, which is located just outside of Six Nations. A couple of our staff members actually live there and are a part of that movement. Really great one. Indigenous knowledge is a solution. So at ICA, we kind of say like climate change, colonialism causes climate change. Indigenous knowledge is the solution. And like even beyond that, Indigenous rights can be solutions, Indigenous stories, Indigenous teachings, all of those things about the way that we carry ourselves have offerings. Controlled fire burns, that's a really great one. So if you don't know what that is, it's a method of, forest management or managing our relationships to the forest, where folks would do controlled prescribed burns in hopes to reduce forest fires and other kind of impacts that are happening. Really great. In the US, they moved to allow tribes to declare climate disasters. Oh, and move to allow resources for climate adaptation actions. That's great. We do need to adapt and mitigate. Love it. And more land back. There's also land back lane. Divestment is really important. We have another Anishinaabe in the house. Hi, I'm also Anishinaabe from Garden River, and part of a group that they founded, the Climate Justice Thunder Bay. Oh, well, we're going to be Googling you, and feel free. I'm going to leave my email in the chat. If you want to chat, let me know. I'll type it in right now. Oh, yeah, Fort William. I know where that is. I've been there. So that's my email. Hi, Cynthia, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I've been following you for a while. I mean, not you personally, but like Indigenous Climate Action, and been trying to get involved, but yeah, I'm paying more attention, and I was super grateful to see that this was happening.
Great. Love to hear it. So you have my email, feel free to reach out. Would love to chat more about the work that you're doing. You'd probably end up chatting to Jacob, but I mean, I would still I'm curious.
Okay, cool.
What's happening in Anishinaabe territory? I'm just nosy. I want to know,
We have FOMO, that's for sure.
Exactly. Yes. That's what it is. I'm going to move us to the next question so that we still have time for Q&A. And I honestly don't know how to do that. Oh no, I think you have to type. Oh no. Okay, I'm curious, did that change for folks on their voting? You should see at the top, it says presenter has changed slide. Just click the blue one of go to slide. And for those that don't have Mentimeter, the question is, what do you think is needed for a just transition? And while you're responding to that, I just wanted to kind of summarize the previous question on why we asked it. So at ICA, the solutions that we put forward and the solutions that we like to support need to be Indigenous led. They need to be rooted in Indigenous sovereignty. They need to be rooted in transformation for action, societal transformation, and not focused on individuals. And it needs to be focused on responsibility and relationship. And these principles, just so you know, are just really important for Indigenous solutions. They need to be Indigenous led, created by and for us. And Jamie, Jacob, any reflections on? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I have a question actually, JC. What's your definition of just transition?
Well, I don't want to give up too much, but I will start by saying the just transition movement started back in, I don't even know what year. Sorry, I probably should have Googled that, but union and labor movements actually started the just transition framework and movement. Which was started, with the hopes of transitioning workers away from oil and gas into more renewable, longstanding solutions and work, so that when we do make this transition, we're not leaving anyone behind. That being said, and I think it's kind of being shown in these here, I'll just share so everyone kind of sees my reflection at the same time. Some of these responses here, transformation, change, transformational, or is that a word? Yeah. Reconciliation, funding shift to BIPOC, which would be Black, Indigenous, and people of color, Indigenous sovereignty, decolonization, equity, justice. And I think these are some really great points. Y'all definitely seem to have a great understanding, Indigenous-led community leadership and Indigenous sovereignty. So for me, when I think about an Indigenous-led just transition, it goes beyond just renewable energy, and it goes more focused on that first question is like, what solutions are we putting forward, and are they created for and by Indigenous people? Do they support Indigenous sovereignty? And are we bringing Indigenous folks to be the decision makers and at the forefront and at the front line of a lot of those types of questions and frameworks and approaches? So in summary, just transition for me is Indigenous folks leading the way to a better future, a healthier future.
I wonder how, thank you, JC, for sharing that. I wonder how this would work in a community like mine, because so Métis folks, they do qualify for like some post-secondary funding. But when I was in university 10 years ago, the only way you would receive post-secondary education funding from our settlement is if you were only to go into a trade, and if you stayed on the community. That's the only way you're going to get funding to go to school. And a lot of the times we wouldn't qualify for like things like student loans because technically we don't own our land, we don't own our houses. So it's created like a lot of my family and people in this area are involved in the gas and oil industry, and mainly because of the system set up to only have us work in that industry in order to support and sustain our families.
Really helpful reflections. I love that. And I'm just seeing in the chat, Jacob, I'm putting you on the spot here. You put in equity and reconciliation is what just transition means to you. Can you kind of give folks a little bit of a summary of how you came to understand just transition? Because that actually used to be Jacob's position. And then we're going to go into an open Q&A.
Sure. I'll take a minute or two. Well, I think of justice, right? And justice looks differently to everybody, especially BIPOC folks. Justice may look differently for different tribes and different nations as well. And so for me, the justice part is the reconciliation part, and the transformative change is the equity, because we cannot do this work without equity and inclusion. And when I mean equity, I'm definitely meaning funding, and not just the back burner stuff. I'm talking, that reconciliation part, treaties, honoring sovereignties, the right to self-determination nations, and being able to just be Indigenous and not always having to move for people. Like, I don't know if anybody understands what that means, but for me, it's just like not moving all the time and standing our ground and being supported to stand ground, and not always having to do free labor, I think, is something else. So anyway, I'll just stop there.
I wonder, okay, when I think of reconciliation, because people relate the word reconciliation to like the TRC, right? And it's just to do with the residential school era. And which is really unfair because, you know, reconciliation shouldn't just be about one component of colonialism that we're just now comfortable talking about. It should also, and like, because reconciliation for me is like, I participated in this dialogue with the Nelson Mandela Foundation in 2013 to 2015 on how these different countries around the world reconcile with their past, usually dark past. So there's like folks there who were descendants of Nazi death doctors. There was people there who were child soldiers during the Yugoslavian wars. And it was always how to reconcile with memory, usually oppressive memory. And they were really confused as why Canada was involved in this conversation, because to them, they didn't know that there was anything horrible happened when it came to colonialism in so-called Canada. And for them, it was like reconciliation. In order for reconciliation to occur, you have to first acknowledge that truth, why you need to reconcile in the first place. And if you can't do that, reconcile or acknowledge that truth of why you need to reconcile in the first place, and there's no way you're going to actually achieve reconciliation.
Another mic drop moment. It's like truth and reconciliation. You can't have one without the other. I like, very simply put. I love it. Thank you. I want to transition us into question period because I know there's only 9 minutes left, and like we could probably talk all day and talk your ears off, but we wanted to give you that chance to ask us some more direct questions or general questions about our work, us as individuals. Totally up to you all. You can come off mute and ask, or raise your hand, or you can type them in the chat and we'll be answering them for the next few minutes.
Something that came up for me, and I am based in the United States, where some of our native tribes are federally recognized and state recognized, and others are just state but not federally recognized. And what we see there is, which I'm sure you all know, is a disconnect in the rights that they're able to access and the land usage there. So there's a lot of advocacy that happens. And it sounds to me like there's a similar situation in your context as well. And so I'm wondering, when you're going into these communities that are similar but have very different rights, what is your learning process like in order to engage with them successfully?
Yeah, it's a two-pronged answer for me specifically, and I'll let other folks join in. So the first one is I always make sure that I'm doing a lot of research on the community before I get there. And that goes to like anywhere I travel. Honestly, it's just a practice to know the Indigenous land and know their rights and know if there is a treaty there, what are their treaties look like? Like, I will read it so that I know what's going on. I will read some of the projects that their community is leading, and I'll try to use and find relevant examples. So it basically entails a lot of research. And secondarily, you know, our team is looking to implement the same kind of approach where instead of just having those like us knowing it, is having specific policy points for us to approach the community with and say, hey, look, this is how you can impact in your specific province or in your specific territory. And that would be from the support of our research manager, who would be doing a lot of that back end research, so that we can go to the communities. And when they're asking like, oh, there's this new fisheries policy that came in, this just came up, which is why it's in my mind, this new fisheries approach that they're trying, how can we improve it? Who do we go to? How do we do, like, they want to know action steps. So for us, it will be very clearly just doing the research, taking the time to make sure that when we're there, we're ready to answer those questions. And Jamie, I saw you came off mute. I don't know if y'all two want to answer that as well. Go ahead, Jacob.
I was just going to add in there, I think a large part about it is humility, coming to the nation, the tribe, the people, the community with humility, and understanding that you don't have all the answers, and that you've been in the community for 5 seconds. So, you know, a lot of people, you know, I hear this story all the time, but chiefs and council delegates, representatives, chief and council leadership, matriarch leaders, however it may be translated, people always will knock on their door. We know what's best for you people. We know how is this gonna, it's like a quick sale. It's a sale. And what I always say is we got to get away from that model. And ICA does a really good job at working with community, and they really truly do understand what community speed is and how Indigenous folks, they're accountable for not just the people and the elders and the young people, but they're thinking 7 generations into the future. It's not just let's have a side chat and then we're gonna make a decision really quickly, or we're gonna have a work plan and we're gonna have a report and we're gonna base it off of the report. I feel like Indigenous people, it's so much further. In ICA, we really have to have that foresight, and we're really good at working with community. Thank you.
And I think look into our kinship laws as well. And a really simple way to tap into a kinship law is when I go into an Indigenous community, I introduce myself, but I also say what community I'm from and who my grandparents are, all 4 of my grandparents. And then usually when I do that, someone's related to someone or they know who we are, and it just makes the work so much easier.
Yeah, and you reminded me, you both actually, is like when we do go to do these programs, we usually are asked by the community, and I take the time to speak with the people that are organizing it, like, what do you think is relevant to you? And I will send them the curriculum in advance, and they pick out the activities that they think will work best, and they tell me how to change it if I'm the one that's going to be going into the community. So we do all of that before we even get there. And I think Jacob put it really well. It's like, it is about humility. I'm not going to have the answers for the communities that I'm going into. My job is to help harvest and have folks realize that they have the answers. So that framework as well, I think, is really important when it comes to working with Indigenous communities, is you're not coming in with the answers. You're coming in to find the answers from the knowledge that's already there, that they already have. All right. We have 4 minutes left. I feel like time for one more question, and then we can close out, and feel free to email us if you have questions as well. We'd love to chat. So one more question. Yeah.
I'd love to go. Sorry. So I'm Rebecca. I work for the Federal Agriculture Department. I'm on the climate change mitigation team. So your work has been very relevant. Thank you for your talk today. My colleague and I have been following ICA for a really long time, and we've read that first report. We've shared that report with our colleagues. We've transitioned it into PowerPoints and shared that. I've tried to incorporate it, through my comments on different input and documents through my work. And I really find, at the end of the day, I'm kind of like a lowly policy analyst, and people just pat me on the head and say, like, that's nice, like, thanks for your passion, kind of thing. So I wonder, like, one idea I had is, like, I can continue to do those things, and I will, but do you have any other advice or resources, I guess, maybe directed towards policy making that you could point me to? One thing I thought is, like, perhaps you guys do training sessions, and I could bring somebody from ICA, like, directly into the department to do talks. But I don't know if you have any other suggestions. Maybe I would be so happy to hear them.
So to start, yes, we do presentations and things like that. And you can find, I'm just going to link it here. So this page on our website, you scroll down to, wait, this isn't the right one. Oh, yes. So the very first one is, like, have an idea for a partner project with ICA ? Fill out this form. Or if you have, like, a event or working and you're looking for a speaker, you can directly ask for us that way. And then we would actually send you to Brianne, who is our research manager, who does all of that policy work. So in my mind, I don't really have anything to point to, but I will say our executive summary of phase 2 of the Decolonizing Climate Policy is out and able to read. So you can kind of summarize it, and it will be, read that summary, and it will be released in the next couple months. So you can, read that a little bit more. Anytime I speak to, folks that are supporting Indigenous folks, I always just ask, like, pushing that envelope a little further and asking those people those questions of, like, why are we talking about Indigenous-led policy or decolonizing climate policy without Indigenous folks in the room? And that a lot of the times will really just like invigorate people to realize that like maybe the right people that need to be here to do this work aren't here, and we should be finding ways to include those people. And like I think definitely starting off by inviting ICA and inviting Brienne to come and speak is a great start. And she'll probably have way more suggestions because like I'm not a policy person, but I'm noticing we have 1 minute left. Jamie, Jacob, any reflections on that before we close out?
We're not policy.
Yeah, being full transparency, like I like policy on the side, but as for like those specific policy questions, I would definitely recommend reaching out to Brienne on our team to do that.
We have a lot of great folks on our team who like deal with policy. Unfortunately, they're just not here today. But there is a great team with ICA though, so I definitely would say reach out for sure, like JC suggested.
And with that, thank you all for coming, and thank you so much for your time and listening with open hearts and open minds. I'm going to pass it back to Elise to read that awesome next event.
Let me get off mute first. That was awesome. Thank you all. I was forgetting to give you time cues because I was so enthralled with the information and how you present it. There's a lot of strength in your work, and I really, really do appreciate you all taking the time to be here. So CJRF's next solution series is going to feature Young Power in Social Action, YPSA, on March 22nd. I put that link in the chat for anybody that's interested in registering. And all of the links that JC, Jacob, and Jamie shared will be sent out via email from the CJRF account at a later date. But again, just thank you so much. This has been a really awesome experience.
Thanks for coming, everyone. And thanks for having us.
Bye.
Thank you.